So this is an issue that has come up a couple of times over the course of the last week or two, and the NFLPA leadership has been posturing it in this direction. They want another virtual offseason program because of concerns about the pandemic. So they're moving in that direction. Memo sent today by the NFLPA to all players recommending that players choose not to show up. Remember, it's all voluntary except for the mandatory mini camp that every team has one of, a 3-day gathering. Everything else in the offseason program is voluntary. Now, guys have roster bonuses tied to it. Some have salary de-escalators where if they don't show up for enough of the offseason program, their base salary for the year actually drops. But beyond that, it's truly voluntary. There's no gain. There's no expense if you don't show up. You're not doing anything wrong. But, and this is where it gets complicated for the NFLPA, I believe, it's a competitive industry. It's a zero-sum game. There are 53 jobs that ultimately will be had. There are 11 spots on the starting lineup for the offense. There are 11 spots on the starting lineup for the defense. And Charean, my broader concern, and we'll get into the specifics here, but my broad concern is, given the way this specific industry operates, 90 players per team in the offseason, competitive process that whittles it to 53, you're going to have a hard time getting guys who think that choosing to show up makes it more likely or less unlikely that they'll have jobs when September rolls around. There's too much at stake, and it's too unique of a business to expect young players or players who are on the fence, players who think they're destined to get cut, players who are desperate to just say, I got an NFL paycheck for a season. You're not going to be able to convince those guys, I believe, to choose to stay away from the offseason program.
I think it's going to vary team by team, because you look at a team like the Buccaneers that has a ton of veterans, that a lot of those guys are going to make the roster. What if Tom Brady calls you up as a young player and says, don't go? I just think these guys are going to be under immense pressure. It's going to be like crossing the picket line back in the strike days for some of these guys on these veteran teams, because they're going to be under intense pressure from these veteran players. And I think some of these teams are going to have, like they did last season, like Tom Brady orchestrated at the local high school. They'll just have their own workouts away from the team. I can see that happening on some of these teams. But you look at a team like the Jaguars, like the Texans, who have a ton of new players, who have new coaches. I don't see many of those guys staying away. I think you're going to see a lot of those players show up on those teams. So I do think, Mike, that it's going to vary team to team. But those young guys are going to want to go for obvious reasons. They need to learn the offense or the defense or whatever. They need to learn how to play special teams. If that's what they do, to get a chance to make a roster, you have a better chance if you're in the offseason program, if you're a young guy.
There's so many different ways this can go. Let's use the Tom Brady example. If you are a young player on the Buccaneers and you get the phone call just after you sign your contract as an undrafted free agent following the 3-day draft that's coming up in 16 days, brand new, Buccaneers, this is great. I know I'm going to have a hard time making the roster, but I'm really going to go and try. I've always been a starter. I've always been a good player. I believe in me. I think I can do it. I'm ready to go work. Tom Brady calls and says, don't show up. First of all, I agree with you. It's going to be difficult for that person to not show up, especially if that person plays receiver and never wants the ball thrown to him by Tom Brady. But is Tom Brady going to make that call? Now, maybe on a different team, that call gets made. On the Buccaneers, where the obvious quest is for Super Bowl championship number 8 for Tom Brady, is he going to choose to not take advantage of the organized offseason program where the NFL has figured out how to keep guys virus-free? I mean, they're going to work out anyway. What happened last year? The union told players, don't work out on your own. What did they do? They worked out on their own. Guys who going to want to get ready for the season. So I don't know how many teams at the end of the day are really going to be able to hold this together. Maybe teams that don't expect to be competitive, like the Broncos. They're one of the teams that have decided to boycott the voluntary offseason program. I mean, if the Seahawks, the other team that so far has voted, or however they got to this point, decided not to participate in the voluntary offseason program. If they say no, if you're the Rams or the 49ers or the Cardinals, do you respond to that by saying, good, stay away. We're going to show up and we're going to work? I think the fact that we're seeing this piecemeal and it's not all 32 teams at one time, I mean, unless they're trying to command the news cycle for 3 days and they're going to have these statements in dribs and drabs, I don't think it ends well. I think there are going to be too many teams that choose to do it. And let's say that Tom Brady decides to be a good union brother. We're not going to go. We'll boycott along with everyone else. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to the high school down the street, and we're going to do our program there. Well, you know what? Any of the guys that show up have no protection if they get injured. None. You get injured, you tear an ACL, you don't get your salary for the year. They can put you on the non-football injury list. You show up to the team facility and you get injured there, you're covered. So I just think that because of the competitive realities within each team for jobs and the competitive realities between and among teams when it's time to play games and guys want to get ready to play, I just think they're going to have a hell of a time holding it together, especially because, Charean, look, and I always support the players when they fight with the owners because I don't think the players get a fair shake, and I think the players, because they won't strike, they never get the best deal they can. I think this is a mistake because I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of guys. You mentioned the picket line. There's going to be a lot of guys crossing that picket line just like they did in 1987, and the strike fell apart.
This offseason, Mike, maybe this is a good example. I don't know. The Broncos had 22 players at the practice facility this offseason, according to Tom Pelissero of NFL Media. They were second to the Cowboys, who had 25. There were about a dozen teams that have 15 or more players show up. So they have not been getting a good response to players going to team facilities. Pull the curtain back on this. A lot of players don't live in the city where they play football. They go elsewhere. A lot of coaches, too, by the way, live elsewhere in the offseason. They go home for the offseason. It's why the Packers have a ton of guys with bonuses tied to being there in the offseason program. Aaron Rodgers, this is according to SI's Albert Breer, Aaron Rodgers has a huge one. He's one of those guys at $500,000 bonus. Kenny Clark has $600,000. The Packers have a ton of players with these huge bonuses tied to going back to Green Bay to work out in the offseason for obvious reasons, because they don't want to stay in Green Bay in the offseason. They have homes elsewhere in the offseason where they go and participate. I'm wondering, Mike, how much of this, with these piecemeal statements coming out, we're going to have more of them over the next few days, how much is it to put pressure on the NFL to say we are going all virtual? We know they're supposed to start on Monday with 2 weeks of virtual, and then they're going to reassess, which we know they want to go to in-person after 2 weeks. Is this to put pressure on the NFL to say, okay, you're fine, we're not going to have virtual? I don't think it's going to work, but I'm wondering if this is a ploy here to get the NFL to respond.
Well, I think it is. And you know what? They had their leverage when they figured out the salary cap for this year. I thought that would be the moment where the NFLPA extracted from the NFL as part of the agreement to the final salary cap number, because it's always a negotiation. Every year, it's the result of a negotiation between league and union. Even though there are formulas that are at play, the two sides agree to what the salary cap is going to be. I thought the union would get from the league a commitment that it would be a virtual offseason again, but maybe they tried, and the league's position is, look, let's listen to Tyler Lockett. I got a lot more I could say. Let me say this before we listen to Tyler Lockett. I wanted to mention the Aaron Rodgers thing, because first of all, it's no secret. You can get his contract anywhere. It's a $500,000 workout bonus that he has. Do you really think he's not going to show up and let Jordan Love have all the first-team reps and get ready and get back? Do you really think? And also, Aaron Rodgers is pissed at the union. He was the union rep. He's not happy with the deal they did last year. Do you think he's going to listen to union leadership now? Or is his attitude, screw you, I don't like the way you do business? I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to refuse to show up. I just don't. Here's Tyler Lockett, the Seahawks receiver, talking about this issue of virtual offseason programs.
There was a statement that was put out, and all the words were pretty much said in the statement. I think that last year, we did a virtual offseason. Nobody expected it to happen, and it worked out perfectly fine, just because of the pandemic and the global shutdown and everything that took place and that's happened. And so in the statement, it's also referred in there that, we also want to do a virtual this year.
Do you feel safe working out of the facility now?
I'm not at the facility.
I mean, like, if it's like in a matter you don't feel safe going there now?
I mean, honestly, I don't feel safe anywhere. I don't feel safe even in my own house. So, I mean, unless I stay in my house forever, I know I'm gonna be good. But I mean, at some point, you gotta try to get back to some type of normalcy. And so, I mean, but it doesn't matter. I can go to a gas station and touch the pump. You know what I mean? I can get traded cash. Like, I mean, nobody's gonna feel safe.
I hope he's not the star witness in support of the boycott the off-season workout program. If you're not safe anywhere, why not go to the team facility? Why not go work out there? You know, I was not a fan of the argument that was made by the powers that be in college football last year that we should go ahead with the season because the players are safer here than they would be anywhere else. Because the college football coaches wanted the big mamu. They wanted their money, so I just was wired to assume that anything they said was BS. But Charean, in this setting, what did we learn last year? Where is the safest place a pro football player can be based upon the ability of the NFL to get through the season, except for a brief period of time in Tennessee, a brief period of time in Baltimore, a little bit of time in Cleveland, right? There wasn't a single Seahawks player that tested positive all year. How can you say it's not safe to go to the facility? This is, to me, plain and simple, a ploy by the veterans to not give young players in a year where there will be extra incentive to cut expensive guys and save cap dollars. They want to avoid, and I'm calling it like I see it, folks, they want to avoid giving the young players the chance to prove themselves. So the coach says, or the GM says, or the owner says, wait a minute, we got this guy who's making $700,000 this year. We got this guy who's making $7 million. We can bank $6.3 million. We're cutting one of them. We can bank $6.3 million in cash and cap space in a year where the cap's down. And we can carry that over to next year if the cap's still down relative to what it would have been. I think that's what the leadership of the NFLPA, primarily if not exclusively consisting of veteran players whose interests conflict with the young players who are trying to get jobs, that's what I believe is going on, Charean.
The only thing I would argue that it's not the same as in the season is the offseason program. Most teams go Monday to Thursday, right? So players fly back home Thursday night and they're away from the team facility and then wherever they live, and then they fly back into town Sunday night. So they're around other people, they're flying, they're doing those things that they didn't do during the season. That's the only reason I would say it's different than what occurred in the season. And I don't know, and I've read somewhere that testing is uncertain exactly how they're going to do testing for these guys. I assume there will be some sort of testing. We've seen college football teams have to pause because of COVID. COVID's not gone yet. However, having said all this, I do think this is bigger than COVID, Mike. I do think that many veteran NFL players don't ever want an in-person off-season program again. They look at other sports and go, why are we having an off-season program? No other sport does this. No other sport has their players show up, most of them unpaid in the offseason, to do this. So I do think this is bigger than COVID. I think this is a ploy by the union to get away from off-season programs, period. And it's going to be very entertaining to watch how many guys show up and how many guys don't show up to teams. And can you get a practice done if you only have 25 players, if you don't have your starting quarterback there? It's just going to be fascinating to me to watch how this plays out over the next couple weeks.
This is the first attempt at collective union action since the 1987 strike that failed after 3 weeks of replacement players. Players began before that third week to start crossing the picket line. The avalanche eventually followed. I just don't believe it's going to work. I think that, first of all, you got a lot of young players who just are disengaged and they don't care. And I think they're smart enough to realize my chances of getting game checks from an NFL team go up dramatically if I do the things that the team wants me to do. And they've got to convince me that this is really about COVID, because COVID is everywhere. And Charean, you talk about guys flying home. Look, guys were out in the communities when they left the facilities last year. They resisted the bubble. They still were able to spot guys who were infected, get them away from the rest of the team, and avoid, except for Tennessee, Baltimore, and Cleveland, outbreaks. And I agree with you. This isn't about COVID. I think COVID is the pretext for trying to protect veteran jobs. It worked last year to a certain extent. They'd like it to work again this year. They want the younger, cheaper players, especially with a $25 million difference between where the cap would have been and where it is. They don't want those guys to earn playing time, roster spots, starting jobs, and bump guys to the curb who are expected to make multiple millions of dollars instead of the league minimum. I think it's that plain and simple. And I just texted George Atala, the NFLPA spokesman, point blank. I'm having a hard time buying that this is about COVID. I want to see what he has to say. And we'll welcome him, J.C. Tretter, DeMaurice Smith, anyone from the NFLPA board of directors. Let's hash this out, because I really don't think it's about COVID. I think it's about protecting veteran salaries.
Well, and I think the veteran players feel like they don't need this. It is for the younger guys, right? And so they're more than willing not to go and not to show up. But yeah, the young guys need it. We've seen that. We don't know how many guys last year didn't make jobs because they didn't get that in-person off-season workout to make an impression with their teams. But we know there are many guys who didn't get that opportunity last year, Mike, that they otherwise would have gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see how this plays out. But open invitation to George, to JC, to DeMaurice, to anyone else from the union that would like to have that conversation and convince me that this really is about COVID. I just don't think, given where the pandemic currently is, given the fact that you got plenty of guys that aren't going to choose to get vaccinated, it's hard to tell me you're concerned about COVID if you refuse to get vaccinated. I was concerned about COVID. You know what I did, Charean? I got vaccinated. I mean, that's the most obvious. You want to prove that you're concerned about COVID, go get vaccinated. Then what do you have to worry about? That's why I think this whole thing is just a house of cards, frankly, and it's going to fall apart. And I guess they figure, what the hell, we may as well try. What does it hurt to try? Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, we're in the same spot we would have been in.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. You go, you try it, you put pressure on the NFL, you see what happens, roll the dice, and 2 weeks into this thing, we'll see where they are, if they're going to cave and give in to not having in-person workouts, or if they're going to continue with the virtual.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.